Now you are. Am I on? Oh, everybody will know when I'm on because you will not be able to hear me without a microphone. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Molly Colvin. I'm a psychologist at Mass General Hospital, and it is my pleasure to be here today with all of you to hear from this amazing panel. This morning, as I was listening to that keynote that we just saw, which just blew me away, and it's such important and powerful work, I was thinking a little bit, I couldn't help but think a little bit about the history of psychology. And psychology has a history sort of in the early 20th century of becoming very biological and very reductive. And then around the mid sort of part of the century, there was this whole movement called humanism, which was about the power of mental health that comes from being within community and being within understanding. And I think the work that we just heard about is a fabulous example of humanism and the importance of humanity. And this panel that we have today is actually going to bring that together in terms of talking about practically from how to do support from lived experience. It's such an important part of mental health. It's one thing to sort of say that we need to take care of our mental health. It's another thing to actually do it. And I'm so glad that we have these fabulous experts here with us this morning to help us sort of talk through some of the common concerns and how to do that well. So we have joining us Jessica Divin, who is the mom of 3. Her son Ben is living with Duchenne and is 17, and you're from Chicago. Claudia Senesac is a physical therapist from the University of Florida who's worked with many patients and families living with Duchenne for many years. Jack Ridolphi is an adult living with Duchenne, currently a college student at VCU and a member of the PPMD Adult Advisory Committee. And Jill Castle is the mom of 2. Her son Anthony is 23 and living with Duchenne, and she's from Arizona. Jill also has experience as a behavioral and education specialist who helps families advocate for school accommodations. So I'm going to let them do most of the talking because they're the experts in this one. And I thought I'd actually kick it off maybe by Jill. I think when we were talking about some of the kind of common concerns and having some thoughts about just mental health in general and what that means in a practical, everyday circumstance.
What concerns?
You want me to rephrase it?
Yeah, I think I know what you're. I think I know what you're getting at.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Jill. Many people probably have met me just because this is my 20th conference this year. So my story, I guess, what I wanted to share about what I've learned is that, at first I kind of felt traumatized, like most of us do when we find out. And I ran around trying to fix everything and find all these solutions and get services and get everything my son needed. When in hindsight now, what I tell new parents is the first thing to think about really is getting yourself well. Your son's been in his body and living his life since birth. That day that you find out is traumatic for you, but it's just another day for your child. They don't know their whole world's changed until they see you respond differently and they see your trauma. And now all of a sudden the whole family's in it with you. So hindsight, I spent a lot of years running around and trying to fix it. And it was very similar to driving a car 90 miles an hour in second gear for years. And of course it's going to break down. And it broke down. It broke down bad. And I was forced into figuring out how to not be in a victim mode anymore. I fight, and raised money and did all these things. So on the outside, I was telling myself I wasn't a victim, but my mentality really was, because I was living in this 24/7, in this grief all the time. And what I started to realize was that I had to learn how to live in the present. Like the present was too painful to live in for me. So I was always either ruminating about the past that I wish was still the same when I didn't know, and I thought my life was going to be different, or I thought my children's lives were going to be different. And then I'd be stuck in the future tripping with the anticipatory grief that wasn't real. So I'm not saying anticipatory grief isn't real. It's very real. We all know this. But by getting stuck in it, like I was not living in today, and my son was here today, happy, wanting to play, wanting to experience life, and I'm future tripping about things that aren't even real yet. So I kind of came to this place, and I had very little choice if I wanted to survive and maybe even thrive someday. You know, I had to figure out how to live in the present and have radical acceptance of what is. So I'm not saying that I didn't go on to try to change things or make a difference in this space, but I couldn't do that until I radically accepted what is and where we were. And once I was able to kind of stay in my body and do that, I started noticing how beautiful our days were. Like how beautiful our life was, and we were here now, and like, what are we doing? Like with all of this, instead of just like being here, you know? And so that started helping. That started helping me. Since then, I have made a lot of changes by going to I've done a lot of therapy. I've gotten a lot of help. I have learned how to deal with my survivor's guilt. Like, you know, I think there was a place where I really felt like, what right do I have to be happy when it is so hard for my son? But he's so happy. Like, things are hard for him, but he's so happy. And so I started to realize that honestly, the only way I was going to heal my family was if I was healed and if I got help. And so, and I'm not just talking about a little bit of counseling. I'm like, I had to get trauma therapy because what I had been through was traumatic. And I had all these behavioral signs, and I'm a behaviorist. And I could not get a handle on myself, you know? All the impatience and all the, you know, frustration all the time and just wishing things weren't the way they were was like a really unhealthy way to live. And until I started to heal, you know, I wanted to focus on healing my boys. I did all the SIB, I did all the early SIB shop stuff. I did all these things for Anthony, and really the most progress both of my kids made in mental wellness was when I got well. I mean, it was really that important that I do that. That was the only way that they could figure out that it was okay, and I gave them permission. All that unwellness that I carried around made them feel like a burden, you know? And they would try to make things better for me. And I'm not the one with Deshaun, you know? Like, it just got upside down so quickly. And it stayed that way for a long time because my brain got really stuck. And it was really hard to get unstuck. And so I had a midlife, I don't call it a crisis, I call it a renaissance. Because I like to shape and call things prettier, make them look prettier for everything. But I, you know, had this sort of awakening that I had the right to be happy. Like, I'm a person too. And that when I was happy, my kids were happier, and everybody was happier, you know? And it was okay that I go out dancing. It was okay that I go on trips and do the things that used to make me a person, like who I actually was before all this started. And it wasn't selfish because the byproduct of that was everyone else in my family's wellness, you know? I think some of our boys, I've heard from several of our young men that, you know, they carry the burden of our unwellness. And I just didn't want to do that anymore. So I just felt like joy and happiness was an emergency. And if we do have limited time, which pretty much all of us do, what was I doing? What am I doing? Like, so I don't know. I woke up. I'm so grateful that I did. I got to look around and see all the beautiful things that there are. I have bad days. I still have bad days. But I really purposely try to put myself in the way of beauty. Like I try to seek it out. You know, if I'm having a bad day and I have to make dinner and I don't want to, I order out, or I put music on and we dance in the kitchen, or we eat crap and we have fun with it. You know, I mean, I don't know. I figured it out a little bit better, and it took a long time, but it's made all the difference in my whole family.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I think that the vulnerability that you just shared there about kind of what your journey was like is so powerful, because I know it resonates with so many people. And I think you really highlight some really important things, which is that there is for many families, I think, sort of an initial trauma response. And when that happens, we sort of go into fight or flight mode, right? We sort of get into a state where we have to be busy, doing, and trying to make everything okay. And when you're in that space, it's really hard to be centered in the moment. It's really hard to do mindfulness. It's really hard to kind of just be in the here and now and say, I'm gonna dance in my kitchen, if you're constantly sort of thinking ahead. And I remember when we were all sort of planning this, we were talking about this, you were also sharing something about expectations, Jessica, about kind of thinking about when, you know, also kind of how much you can hold around expectations and then when you put it down, which I think is a nice tie-in with what Jill was just saying too. I don't know if you want to speak about that.
So when they asked me to speak about expectations, I'm a visual person. All right, so we're gonna go on a little field trip. So we're gonna do this together. We're gonna go to the grocery store. All right, you need 4 items. Let's just milk, eggs, bread, toilet paper. Are you team cart or are you team no cart? I am team no cart. Maybe I forgot my quarter at Aldi, I don't know. But I'm like, my expectation is I'm gonna go in, it's gonna be faster, I'm gonna grab all my items and go. Well, you're walking through the grocery store and you're like, oh wait, I'm supposed to give something like cookies or something for someone's school class project or whatever. And oh, bananas are on sale. And so you're getting like, you know what I mean? Like you got it wrapped around. And you know, you're getting the pity glances from like everyone else shopping and they're like, she should have got a cart. And you're like, no, I got this. And you're piling it on. And you're like waddling up to, you know, where you're gonna put it on and there's a long line. And you're standing there and it's getting heavy and you're starting to sweat and your phone's ringing. And you're like, no, I got it. But what happens? Eventually something falls. And you know what's gonna fall? The eggs are gonna fall, because that's what's gonna make the most mess and like have everyone notice. So the eggs fall. So that's how it is, how I was with expectations. This is everything I expected we were gonna do with Duchenne. And here's the crazy thing, you guys know, you're living it. You're deciding about trials, where are you gonna go to clinic, what medications you're gonna use. It's time for a wheelchair. How are we gonna do that? We're fighting insurance. And you're just getting loaded down and it's getting so heavy. But wait, you have a marriage, you have a family, you have other kids. You know, you go to clinic and you're kind of like, oh, I still have other kids and they need to go to volleyball practice and they need your attention, and it just keeps, and you know what? I was so focused on Duchenne for years that the most important things were dropping. And it was my kids who needed me, it was my spouse, it was relationships, it was my parents who were very ill at the time, and I'm trying to like hold on to this because I had this expectation that Duchenne was going to be different for us. I don't know why. We were gonna figure it out. We were gonna be the ones. It was, do you remember back in geometry, like conditional statements, like if P then Q? I only know this because of my kids, like I've got one out of high school and one in high school, and I hated it. But I had this crazy dumb concept that if I did this, then this would happen. And so if I was constantly stretching, if we were doing this, then my son would walk longer. But you know what? Life is not a conditional statement. And there was one day, we got in the car and we were driving home, and unfortunately, a young driver got his license that day, made a real bad decision and did a U-turn in the middle of the highway, struck our van and crushed my son's leg and broke his femur. And that was the end of it. And I spent so many years thinking I had this magic formula. And that was the expectation. But you ever see those like reality versus expectations? This was reality. Life is reality. And you have all of this just builds and builds and builds. And meanwhile, we were just existing with Duchenne. We weren't living with Duchenne. And that's when I finally was like, oh, I don't want to live this way. I don't want it to be like this. I want to have a relationship with my kids. I want to go do fun stuff. I want to dance in the kitchen. I want to just, and sometimes there's just going to be certain times in your life where you just got to let go. I think the most powerful thing I've learned in expectations, it's a beautiful 2-letter word, and it's no. When other people need me, it doesn't apply to my family. And for a long time, I would be like, no, I'm sorry, my son has this disease. And I would, no, you can just say no. Or just say, you can say it nicely too, like you don't have to like shut the door in their face, but just say, I don't have the capacity for that at this moment. And you know what? Most people are like, oh, okay, thanks for being honest. Because if not, I would say yes, and I would fail, and I would drop all the important things. And I don't want that, And you don't want that. And I think that's why it's kind of cool to get up here and share, because I come to conference, as lovely as everything is up on stage, like look around you, that's where you're going to learn. And I think you just get to a point that, what do you want to expect? Do you know what I want to expect now? I want to have a fun life. I want to have a great time with my kids. And yeah, you do still have to pay attention to the medications, to the equipment, and things like that, but you don't have to do it all at once.
Yeah. Such important words. I mean, I think part of the setting boundaries is kind of what you're talking about sort of being like, I have to preserve my own resources so that I can actually take care of all of the people who are most important, and setting good priorities around that too. I am so curious to hear what Jack has to say about this, but I kind of wonder, can I go first to Claudia to sort of talk about kind of taking care of yourself and how you prioritize your care, and then Jack, I'm so curious to kind of hear your perspective on all of this too, because I know it's going to be a little bit different. Yeah.
I'm really happy to be up here and be part of this because, I've been listening to so many parents over the years, and I think I started out as a healthcare professional, physical therapist, as being one of those therapists saying, you've got to stretch, you've got to do this, you have to do this, you got to do it this many times a day, you've got it, and then realized this is totally not reasonable. And so I think we have to be really good listeners as healthcare professionals and really think about our own lives. Would we be able to do it? I don't have a child with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Could I fit that into my routine? And the reality is that no one can fit this prescription of, I want you to stretch 3-4 times a day, and you need to hold each stretch for a minute, and you're stretching the whole body. And then what I want you to do is, it's insane. It doesn't work, and it creates this stress that these women are talking about and that you're all experiencing. And it gets where you're frantic every minute of the day, and then internally it creates an unhealthy environment internally, and you become ill, whether it's emotionally or whether physically you start to break down, and then you're not able not only to take care of yourself, but you're not able to take care of your family. And that's not what physical therapy is about. Physical therapy is about health. And so, over the years, what I've learned and what I hope I'm projecting out to other therapists and healthcare workers is that it's important that we think about routines. What fits into a person's routine? What's reasonable to do in the course of a day that fits into what you are regularly doing? So if I'm talking about stretching, it's not reasonable to stretch the entire body if there isn't tightness in that body. If if there's an area of the body that's tight, that needs to be stretched. But if I'm talking about a young person that has Duchenne, typically they're not tight everywhere in their body, so their entire body doesn't need to be stretched. If I'm talking about someone that isn't moving very much, we know that movement feels good. So yes, I want to move them. I want you to move them, but they don't have to be moved for, each joint doesn't have to be moved for a minute and held there for a minute several times a day. Movement helps people feel good about everything. We know if you're in bed, you've got the flu, you know you get stiff. And you know when you start moving again, you feel better, your body feels better. And so your child's body's going to feel better. Your adult in your family that has Duchenne, if they're not moving very much, they're going to feel better if you move them. So those are the kinds of things we need to be thinking about. The other thing is that it's not just about stretching. It's about getting outside. It's about having family fun. It's about going on trips. Maybe it's just about, let's do something spontaneous. We talked about, I did something a few years ago about just doing fun things. One of the fun things we did as a family, and I didn't have children that had Duchenne, but we did something where we said to the kids, okay, we're going to throw a few things into a bag. Well, where are we going? Oh, just get in the car. We're just going to do something fun. And we just got in the car, and they didn't know, where are we going? Where are we going? Oh, I don't know, we're just going to show up somewhere. And we just went to a park, to the springs, and went swimming. It wasn't a big deal, but it was a surprise. It was just something spontaneous. It could be just going down to get an ice cream. It doesn't have to be, it's just getting out of the house and doing something fun as a family. That's therapeutic. That's good. Those are the kinds of things that keep families healthy. And that's good because you got out of the house. Sunshine is good for you. Of course, 100-degree weather is not necessarily that healthy for you, but you could do it in the morning before it gets really hot. Just doing fun things and thinking about yourself. You can't help someone else with their health unless you are healthy yourself. And I think both of these women have told their stories in ways that illustrate that really well. You've said dropping the groceries in the grocery store. What a great illustration. The eggs go first, and then all bets are off because people are falling because they're slipping in the eggs, and it's not just you. And then your story was really a great illustration of how you broke down and your family was waiting for you, you know, because they're relying on everyone to work as a unit so that everyone's healthy. So that's what I have to say right now, but I'm really curious what Jack's going to say.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Jack.
All right. I think it's good that you talk about those expectations, especially in like physical aspects, because, you know, I remember going to clinic visits and worrying about how long it would take me to get off the floor and stuff like that. And it's just, you know, that's kind of tough. And I still worry about, you know, pulmonology scores and all that stuff. So, I mean, there's definitely a lot of expectations there that are kind of hard to deal with, that you might receive from, you know, medical professionals or, you know, your family. And I think that it is like a lot of pressure, especially on someone, you know, I want to be a kid and stuff, and like, but I'm worried about my lung health, you know, my physical health, and it's like, you know, I can't do all this stuff. So I think like we definitely feel that pressure, you know, growing up. increasingly because we get, you know, these messages about health and, you know, what Duchenne will do to us. So it's, you know, I think that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah.
And
It strikes me, Jack, as you're speaking about this, that you know, part of this story that the moms are sort of saying is that they're trying to protect you from feeling those expectations, but you felt them anyway, right? And as you were growing up, you felt them. And I'm wondering if you can speak to how you handled that. I know when we spoke earlier, you were sharing a little bit of your own journey about how you kind of hold those expectations and put them over here so that you can be happy and live in the moment too.
I mean, I guess I've learned to accept these expectations as, you know, they're kind of natural to the Duchenne, but, you know, they don't necessarily have to be so intense. And I think ways I've gotten over it is like through talking about it, especially in therapy and stuff like that. And I think that talking about these things, especially with, you know, family or just with a therapist, can really help you understand, you know, how those pressures affect you as a person.
Yeah.
And I think like there's definitely a lot of pressure on people with Duchenne and with the parents too. You know, the parents are always worried about, you know, I'm not really sure how my mom figured it all out, but she did. And I think that it's hard on everyone, but I think we should definitely prioritize how is that affecting you as a person. And I feel like that's very important to be vulnerable about issues surrounding Duchenne and what comes with that.
So really sort of talking about it both just with the community but also in therapy is sort of helpful in figuring out ways of dealing with the expectations. And you've been doing some amazing things. I don't know if you do want to share a little bit about what your experience has been like in college and how you've been handling all of the responsibilities of being a college student and taking care of your health at the same time.
Yeah, well, sure. So it's definitely a lot to juggle with school because I have all the stuff a normal student would have to juggle with all the, you know, the medicines, making sure I have everything I need, making sure, you know, caregivers are coming on time. So I think like it's definitely a lot, but I think through doing therapy through my school, I've definitely been able to kind of manage it all. And it's not easy to manage it all. It certainly is difficult, but I think you just need that support system to help you through everything because it is a lot to deal with, especially with a rare disease. You know, pile up with all the other life stuff, which is also a lot for a lot of people. So
looking back now, if you had like words of advice for other who are coming up in their teen years, what would you say?
I would say just, you know, you should be patient with yourself. It's not, you know, you're gonna mess up. I mean, that's just how it is. But what's important is that you learn from your mistakes and you see, okay, well, what can I do next time? You know, how can I be more organized? And I'm still working on this every day of my life, and I think we all are. But just, you know, make sure you be patient with yourself, not too hard on yourself, because, you know, you're dealing with a lot. You know, especially as someone who's part of the Duchenne rare disease community.
Awesome advice. And I think what I'm also hearing across all of the threads is about battling perfectionism, right? That, you know, I think there's sometimes the expectation piece is we have to do all the things exactly perfectly right now. And I think all of you are sort of saying, actually, we have to dial that down a little bit. And I'm wondering if anybody wants to jump in there and talk about how when they realized they needed to do that and how they did it. Yeah.
I know I can share a little bit. So you think you have it all figured out. You know, I had a couple realizations. One of the first times, and I think people have heard me tell this story before, Ben was young, just been diagnosed, and I was like, this was me on a computer always. Because again, I'm looking for that magic answer. We're gonna find it, it's somewhere out there. And I was talking with Gretchen about this morning, way before like we had these Facebook groups and everything, and maybe it was out there and I just didn't know. We had like, I don't even remember what it was called. Do you remember our little online community through PPMD? It was like a forum. Yeah. And so I would like search for answers. And I remember distinctly one day Ben like came over needing something. I'm at my little desktop And I forget what he needed. And I was like, hold on, I'm busy. And then I was like, and sent him away. And here I am, like, trying to cure Duchenne, like figure out all the answers. And the person I'm trying to help, I just told I couldn't help. And then, like, sent him away. So that was realization one. So then I thought I had it all figured out. But fast forward, I think it was last year, we went to, and I got a permission to talk about this, we had a beautiful conference called The Power of Us. Yeah. And it really addressed kind of what we're talking about today. And Colleen got up to speak. And Colleen, I always butcher your last name because of an L, L-A-B-B-I-D. Anyway, sorry, I digress. But she got up to talk, and to me, Colleen has one of the biggest hearts, and she's a counselor herself. And I was like, I'm really interested to hear what she is saying, but one of the big things that stuck with me is that here's this beautiful counselor, this wonderful mom and person up there saying, I'm a counselor and I went to counseling. And I was like, oh, and like a light bulb went off. And I was like, okay, like, I don't know, it was almost, not that I needed permission, but I was like, oh, it's okay that I'm like at this point. And so I went, and it was amazing. And I know we'll kind of touch on this later, but But those two moments are like really stand out in my mind. So.
I think I love what you said about not helping because you're so busy. I think I learned that busy is, and future tripping and the anxiety part, for me, I learned it was a false sense of control. If I could plan out exactly how I'm going to fix this and what we're going to do and how we're going to take care of everything, and lists, I would have lists. That was my big thing, right? I do the brain dump, which is good, do the brain dump on the paper and figure out the lists. But like, none of it was real. I mean, none of it had happened yet. You know what I mean? Like, I'm organizing things for 5 years down the road, and it's not even going to look that way. Like, I'm using all my energy. You know, when we first found out, I was prepared for a sprint. I was not prepared for a marathon. So I think I had my breakdown when Anthony was around 20 because I didn't have any plan after that. And I went, oh, crap. Like, I just didn't know. And it's like running. I used to be a runner. I try to still run. But, you know, it's like when you start that race and you do that first couple miles too fast, and then you're on like mile 10 and you're like, oh my God, what did I do? You know, I should have started out walking. And you don't. You start out running. And I remember getting the diagnosis. And like I said, here he is 3. His life's no different the next day. He just wants to play. And I've got 72 doctor appointments scheduled, and none of which include therapy for me. You know, I'm just going to fix him. I did the same exact thing. And it's not a marathon. It's actually an ultra marathon nowadays, because we're talking about a full, robust life. Like, we don't have to get it all done the first few years. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And I was saying last night to my dear friend Chris, you know, I was the type of person where the only time I ever let go of anything was to get a tighter grip. I mean, I was a major control freak, and it's just how I dealt with my fear, you know, that and escape. I was an escape artist too. That's a whole nother conversation. But I mean, I just had to learn, like, everything I would plan for never really would happen, and all the things that would happen, I didn't know how to plan for anyway. So it just was the definition of crazy. It was insane. It was insane.
If I could just jump in on that, I think, you know, as a therapist, watching families come in for advice on what to do with their child, I would see families come in and they would be on the edge. And they would just be, just tell me what to do, just tell me how many times I have to do it. And they would just be living on the edge and thinking, like you were thinking, way down the line. And I eventually got to where I would just say, let's deal with right now. Let's talk about right now what you can do right now. And then try to get them to focus on what was happening in the here and now. Because the conversation would be, well, there's a clinical trial that's coming up, and he has to be able to do this and this, and this was part of what you were talking about, like these expectations of, when I go to clinic, I have to be able to do this, and I've got to do the pulmonary function test, and they're going to time me getting up off the floor, and then I've got to do the 6-minute walk test, and I've got to make a, certain milestone here. It's so much pressure. And it's hard as a therapist because you want everybody to achieve these milestones, but at the same time, I'm noticing that their mental health their mental wellness is really teetering. And I'm not a counselor, but I see that things are not balanced. And so I have to make some adjustments going forward with the amount of stress that I put on a family, because the burden is very heavy. The burden is high, and I don't want to tip the balance. I want to be very, not frugal, but I want to be fair in what I'm giving them and not put these high expectations on what I intend for them to do at home. You already have so many things to do. And I don't know that what I'm giving you, if I say stretch in the morning, stretch in the evening, hold it for this amount of time, will that make the difference if he gets into a clinical trial? I don't know that. I know that moving his body will improve his circulation. It will help with the mobility of the joint. Getting him moving while he can move is important. So letting him be a child, letting him participate as he can participate. Those things are important. Functioning as a family, doing family activities, in the things that your family loves to do. If it's getting outdoors, get outdoors. So I want to give you the things that, are important for your family, not just off of a list of things to do, but I want to make it individualized for you and what makes sense for you, and get you off this teeter-totter that you're on and help you balance things, because the expectations are very high, and Jack mentioned that. There's a lot of pressure. Even though they may sit silent during these appointments, they are taking it all in. They hear everything that is being said. And you are their voice for when they're small, and sometimes when they're adults too, because sometimes, depending on their personality, they may not speak up as much. But there is, a balance to it. So as healthcare professionals, we need to be really cognizant of that, and to also bridge that gap and say, I know that this is stressful. How can I help you within my professional role? How can I help you lower the stress with what we're dealing with?
I'm kind of glad you bring up the fact, we might not be saying anything, but I remember certainly paying attention to all these conversations I had with my doctors, or my mom was having with my doctors. So I feel like in this community there's kind of this, obsession with kind of there's, there's physical kind of tasks, and it's like, well, if you're not caring for your mental health, what does it matter if you could get off the floor in under 5 seconds? So, there's a lot of pressure there. And also like, maybe you don't have time to do all the stretches. Because, my mom was at work all day, and now I'm trying to study engineering, and how am I supposed to do all these stretches and stuff if like I have all this other stuff to worry about? So it's like, you should be realistic that you're not going to stretch every night, but here I am talking on a stage, and I didn't stretch every night. So, so I think it's, I think like, we might be so worried about, what is the future going to hold, but you should really focus on what's happening right now. And, I think also like, you guys have your own ways of kind of trying to control everything. I certainly, still deal with that stuff, like, especially trying to control things like how well I did in school and putting so much pressure on these other areas of my life because I couldn't control, what my body was doing. And I think that also contributes to a lot of stress and pressure.
That's so powerful, Jack, because I think you're pointing out kind of a few things here, which is that, living with Duchenne can't be all of your life. You also need to make space to be an engineer and to be a student and to have time to be with your friends and be with your family. But sometimes the feeling that maybe you can't control all the things around the medical condition means that you put more pressure on the things that you can do. It reminds me a lot of what you were saying earlier about you let go just to kind of get the grip tighter in someplace else, right? And sometimes I think about my image with this is often about that game Whack-A-Mole, where they like pop up and you hit it and then another one pops up and it just shows up in a different way. So like if you don't address the sort of root cause of the stress and anxiety, it's going to show up somewhere else. I think this is sort of what you were saying too, Claudia, about if it doesn't show up in your thoughts, it's going to show up in your body, it's going to show up in your physical wellness, it's going to show up in your engineering grades, like it's going to show up in other places if you don't just stop playing Whack-A-Mole and actually like address it at the root. Is that kind of what you're saying, Jack? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And one of the things that you've all been bravely sort of discussing, and I wish I didn't have to say brave because I wish it was just sort of a normal part of healthcare and existence. And I say this as a psychologist, there's still a stigma about counseling. There's still sort of like a shame about feeling like you need to go and talk with somebody. I wish we didn't have to be brave to sort of talk about that publicly on this stage. And yet, it is brave to sort of do that. And you've all sort of talked a little bit about how important that was. And I'm wondering if you could speak about how you made that decision and then how you did it too. And then what it was like in the beginning. Because I think when people go initially, it's not what they think it's going to be. And I often sort of hear from people later that, that wasn't like what I thought it was going to be. And it was a little weird in the beginning. And then it sort of settled in and it was great. But it sort of is a process. And I'm wondering if I can ask one of you to speak about that a little bit, or all of you, if you're comfortable.
I think, so part of what I realized is that my problems didn't start with the Duchenne diagnosis. I brought a whole slew of baggage to the table, right, from a long life up until that point. And for me, Duchenne just threw Miracle-Gro on it all. It wasn't like it just started then. So, and I hadn't dealt with it. So I had quite a big load that had built up over the years. And now there was no escaping it because it was front and center all the time. For me, the big wake-up call that started my journey in getting help was addiction. I was drinking like nobody's business. And, when we first got diagnosed, everybody brought wine and food. That's what they do, right? And it was like, pour me another drink. So for me, that start, and I have a family history of that's how you cope, right? So my first introduction to really getting help was a little bit of a crisis point because I had gotten so deep into that I wasn't taking care of my family, and I had enough experience in my family background to wake up and know I needed to get help. So that sort of launched me into starting to be okay getting help, because now it was like, well, I'm in recovery. That's a good thing. Like, that's a good thing. So it wasn't as, it was far less shameful than my behavior before it. So it wasn't so hard for me then after that to go get trauma therapy and to get other work that I've continued ever since then. It's been a really long journey of doing a variety of different things that work for me. Sometimes this works, sometimes that worked. But what happened was I realized my whole identity had become Duchenne too, because as a mom, who was I if I wasn't somebody who needed help? Like, would I be loved? Would I be able to get help if I needed it if I wasn't someone that you felt sorry for? And that was a big thing to figure out. Like, no, it'll be okay. I'll still have people that love me and that will be there for me even if I'm happy. Even if I don't seem like I have a problem every day, I will still be able to find support when I need it. Because I think I had this screwed up idea that I had to carry on this way in order to get the support I needed. And now I've got more support because I've got healthy people around me that want to support me because I'm helping myself first. You know? So I think
It's a
that's
really
my thing
important
on
lesson. Yeah.
getting help.
So I guess the way I started, I came home from that conference we went to, Power of Us, and I just went to see my doctor, and it was real awkward, I'll tell you, or I felt awkward. It's probably fine for him, because I had known him for 10 years. He had been my doctor, and I said, I need help. I don't know what to do. So he sent me to a counselor kind of affiliated with their group. But I'll tell you what, I learned a big lesson. I went to this counselor, and sometimes it's not a good fit, and that's okay. You will not hurt their feelings if it just does not work out. Like, it's not a big breakup. And she was lovely, she was kind, but every time I went in to sit down, she handed me a clipboard, and I had to write down how I felt. And I was like, this, okay. And I think what finally pushed me over the edge is we were talking about self-care, and I went back to see her a couple weeks later, and she sits down, she picks up the clipboard. Now tell me, did you get away for a day? And I looked at her, I was like, you're crazy. Let's see. So I don't know what's wrong with the cat. We had the cat at the vet. We had strep going through our house. My husband's been away for a 5-day business trip. I'm like, there's no self-care. Like, it was just too much. So back to the doctor I go, and he recommends this other one. So we try her. Lovely fit. From the get-go, so we have a couple meetings, and this is what sealed the deal for me with her. She, inevitably, we came to those great words, self-care, and inside I'm groaning. I might have actually rolled my eyes when she's like, what do you do for self-care? And I was like, I don't have time for self-care. And she's like, you know what, you're right. She's like, what do you do for breakfast? And I go, what are you talking about? She goes, do you have 5 minutes around breakfast? And I was like, yeah. She's like, I'm getting to know you. You eat it standing up as you're like packing lunches or doing something. And I was like, so what? She's like, how about self-care is 5 minutes to sit down to eat your yogurt, to eat your oatmeal? And I was like, oh, I can do that. I can't get away for a day. We talked about this. I can't go to the spa. I mean, unless someone would like to send me there, I won't fight you. But I can't, like, that's not my self-care. And she's like, why don't you just center yourself for the day? Sit down. And I was like, I can do that. And I did that. And it was, and yeah, and we just developed a relationship from there.
That is amazing. It has to be sustainable, right? I think you were talking about this too, Jack, when we were speaking earlier too. Yeah.
And I also want to add that there are like multiple forms of therapy. I actually do group therapy, which is not like traditional, but you basically get in a circle of people and you talk about your problems, and it's kind of nice because you get to talk about you get to hear other people's problems too that you might not even understand. Yeah. So I felt like I was welcome to talk about Duchenne there, and I felt supported by the members, and I felt like I was maybe educating a group of people about something that they might not be very educated on, and I think that's also important, and I find that has been very helpful. It's also just good to talk about what's going on in your life, even the good stuff. So, and I think that it's also interesting to hear you guys' opinions because I feel like my generation has more positive views on getting mental help, so
100%.
So I think it's interesting and empowering that you guys were able to push through that stuff, or maybe signals from your growing up that are presented to you.
Your generation is way more comfortable with this than ours is, we'll say. I see teenagers all the time, and I know there's so many more resources out there too. There's like all the TikTok and people talking about this regularly, which is, I think, pretty awesome too.
And I think as you were saying, that there are multiple forms of like self-care. Like maybe you don't have like 20 minutes a day to like meditate or something. Like just sitting down and maybe just doing nothing for a couple minutes is helpful. So you just gotta explore. And if something doesn't work, what's the harm in trying it? It might work, in the end. So.
Yeah.
I think what's you said something that's really important about getting counseling or getting support is that you're not always talking about what's wrong. I mean, you mentioned that, you're talking about positive things too. And again, it's that balance of, sometimes we're out of balance where we're all focused on the negatives or the stressful things. And it's finding how we can get back up here where, hey, there are a lot of good things happening in our lives. And sometimes we lose focus of those things. And, in a different note, sometimes healthcare workers also need counseling or that support group that can help us when we feel like we're getting out of balance.
Yes.
When we're helping people that are, dealing with a lot of stressful things. It can also be stressful for us. So I just want to put a plug out there for that it's not always the patient that needs support. Sometimes it's a healthcare worker that also needs support.
I agree with that because I think it's important to also not lose the lens that you're working with people too. I think for healthcare workers, the visits are really short and we're sort of trained to hone right in on the areas of difficulty. But I often sort of talk with the families who I work with and the kids who I work with about, well, what are the things you're good at? What are the things you like? What are the passions that you have? Because I think those things are really important in terms of this long ultra marathon that you were talking about making sure that you're focusing still on some of the things that are positive and some of the things that are good and strengths. We're not just talking about Duchenne, but we're talking about engineering, for example, right? Exactly. And I'm wondering, if each of you talked about this sort of like journey of kind of shifting from the kind of acute phase of high stress to sort of living and finding balance. And wondering when you started to add those things back in and this sort of idea that even self-care can be 5 minutes at the kitchen counter, just making sure you're mindful for those few minutes. I'm hearing that there was an evolution, and I know there are probably a lot of newly diagnosed families in the audience, and I'm wondering if you could go back in time and sort of think about how that evolution happened and when it started to creep in, and speak about that a little bit. Does that make sense?
Well, mine was because I'm kind of a dramatic girl. So mine was a bottom. Mine was like a clear.
You hit a bottom.
I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
I don't propose everybody waits for that. I just like the big thing. So I did. I had to have. I really needed like. I can't go forward anymore. And it's a little bit of a discipline issue, right? Like, I had to go, okay, I'm so tired, I can't go see that music show with my friends, right? No, I'm not. I'm too tired to caregive. I'm not too tired to go have fun. So I almost had to discipline myself to just step out that door and do something different. Because I think you just get stuck in, your brain literally is stuck in rigidity of, oh, I can't. And, self-care is not a pedicure. I mean, that's nice, but that's what everybody tells you to go do. I didn't have time for that, But I started to realize self-care is fun. Like incorporating something fun, even when you're tired. And I'd walk out that door and be too tired to go, and I'd be fine an hour later. It was literally the transition of getting me out. So there was a little bit of a discipline component to deciding to get well and taking those steps even though you don't feel like it, you know? I just made that decision to do that.
And I think for me, if I were to look back, especially that first year, the way I've always described it to people is if like a dark cloud descended on us and just kind of hung around. And it was just so dark. And I don't know why, I probably have way better examples. This just popped into my head, just roll with it. But I remember we went, originally from Buffalo, New York, and we flew home because one of my best friends was getting married. We flew home, my parents were gonna watch the kids. Now, Ben at this stage was fine. We had just found out about diagnosis, but I was a mess. I think my husband literally had to like drag me out the door as I'm giving my parents all these instructions. And I get there and I'm surrounded by these people I grew up with, these people I love, and my guard came down and I laughed and we had a great night. And I don't even know if my husband remembers this, but the next morning he looked at me and he's like, "Welcome back." And I was like, "Oh, wow, I've really been a miserable person. I've been so like wrapped up and it felt so good." And that's when I was like, "Oh, we need to just start having fun again. You know, just let go and enjoy what we've been given despite the hard stuff we've been given."
Yeah, I love that, and I love that it brings that sort of this idea about being shaken a little bit out of your rut, right? Which I think is what Claudia was saying earlier about just packing the kids in the car and just going.
Yeah.
You just needed to kind of change perspective, but also be in connection with other people, and I think that's the other thing that I've been sort of a thread that I've been hearing all the way through this, and Jack, I'm going to start with you. I'm wondering if you can you talked a little bit about the being with a group of other people, and the power of group therapy was really important. So there's this piece about kind of social connection, and I'm wondering if you could talk about the importance of that in mental health.
So I think it's definitely good to have like a human connection when talking about it, because like I think doing group therapy actually improved other areas of my life and my social confidence. It's like kind of a practice ground to talk about stuff and see how people react, and I think that's a good space to be in, and maybe that helps me talk to people who I'm closer with, about some of the things I talk about there, and I think that's important too, to just to gain that confidence. Sometimes you're scared to talk to people about what your issues are having, but I think I encourage people just to be open about it, and just like, if you're going to like a clinic with your young boy, and it's like, you should maybe ask them after, what did you think? Are you upset by any of the information you learned? Just to foster like an open environment of talking about Duchenne and disability.
That's awesome.
Such good advice, because I've seen so many families guard their child, and each family has to do what's comfortable for them, but not to say the word Duchenne or to make up a scenario that's comfortable for them. And each family is different, so I'm always respectful of that. But it sets up, again, the child goes to these appointments. They're hearing what the other professionals are saying. So they've heard the word, they don't know what it is, but then the family is couching it maybe in a different way. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and actually I think like you shouldn't just bombard your child with all this information about this disease.
No,
but
I
like
agree.
we're gonna find out at some point. We're gonna start thinking about it, as I age, and I'm gonna start learning more about it and what it means for my future. So I wouldn't be scared of shying away from it, because you're gonna have to talk about it at some point. I mean, it's not.
But I love your idea of saying, how did it go for you today?
Yeah,
that kind of a debriefing with your child at the end of all these appointments.
Yeah, and again, just normalizing that talk about.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I was kind of scared to talk about it. I just like kept it all bottled in. It's like.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder too if the group therapy's got to be really good too, because other people have problems too. Like, we forget that because ours is so big. And I hear so many parents go, well, nobody can relate to my life. But they don't have to relate to Duchenne. They could just relate to pain and discomfort. Because we're all messy humans, right? And so trying to keep things right-sized, like, and realizing there's you're in your group, they're not all Duchenne folks. There are people that have all kinds of struggles. And like, I think we feel isolated and alone because we forget we can connect over just the pain and discomfort. It doesn't have to be the specific thing we're going through. There are a lot of people out there that have similar feelings but different circumstances. You can connect over that feeling. You don't have to have the same circumstance to understand. I mean, even if you have the same circumstance, it doesn't look the same. You don't have the same past. You don't have the same triggers. You don't have the same. So really, it's the commonality of the pain and discomfort that can bring us together as humans. And then you open all these other communities up as resources instead of it being so narrow, like you can only have another young man with Duchenne understand your life. You could make friends that have other problems but understand how it feels to have parents pressure you or to have too much to do. I mean, those are things that you can relate to another human on, and they don't necessarily have to have Duchenne. So I would think that group therapy helped with that, no?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, and also it's good to hear, what other people are dealing with. It's like, I don't understand what other people are dealing with too. So, I mean, they might feel that kind of sense of like, oh, no one understands, but, you can understand. And I think that just kind of makes you a better human being, I would say, just to be exposed to, what other people are dealing with. And that can kind of normalize, okay, well, that person's kind of dealing with something like I'm dealing with, and I can relate to that struggle. Awesome. And I have a lot of problems that aren't Duchenne. It's not just that's not the only problem in my life.
Yes.
Right. Anthony's biggest issue that we had to deal with was a breakup with a girlfriend.
Yeah.
It wasn't about the Duchenne.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So,
I think it's so important because it's about also being viewed as a whole human being, which is sort of where we started actually in thinking about humanism and with the awesome talk we heard this morning too. I think the other thing I'm sort of thinking about is this idea about that you've all sort of talked about having a relationship to Duchenne in some ways, the sort of having thinking about it not being the sole defining piece of identity, either for the family or for you as an individual, but to kind of having a relationship with it. And in all relationships, you kind of have to take space sometimes and get close and then come back. And I hear you all sort of talking about doing that as you sort of move through the marathon. And maybe in the last kind of few minutes, I'm wondering if you have sort of words of wisdom about how you know when it's time to sort of take space or step back and when it's time to kind of approach and re-engage. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, I guess I can start. I guess you should definitely start, looking at this stuff. You don't have to be in crisis to need help, with therapy and stuff. So I think, I honestly think everyone should get therapy, or join a space where you can talk about what happens in your everyday life, the things that upset you, and I think that is important for, everyone. So don't wait, and know that, especially within this community, we know, the struggle of dealing with a condition. So it's like, maybe start thinking about that before it gets to a point where you can't handle it.
I have two signs. One sign when I know I'm getting off track is that Anthony, or even sometimes my other son, starts apologizing to me. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I need this. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I know it's me. It's like I'm acting like, oh, do you really need another glass of water? I'm sorry. I don't, then I know I'm off track. Like I know I'm overall getting past my healthy point. The other thing for me that's a sign is when the snowball effect starts happening and things start going wrong throughout the day. Do you ever notice when you're having a good day, things just start going right? And when you're having a bad day and something kind of goes wrong, it's a snowball effect? I personally, my personal belief is there's some energetic thing to that. And so as soon as I start seeing the snowball effect, I know I gotta stop everything. Like stop everything I'm doing, because it's just, the snowball's gonna get bigger. And so I just stop and I go outside, or I just stop and cancel the next thing and don't care and just redirect where we're going and what we're doing. But I've had to be present enough to pay attention to that happening, because when I'm on autopilot, that's when the snowball starts or the I'm sorry's start, because I'm not really here, you know. So that's, for me, those are the two signs that are helpful to bring me back.
Really great.
And I think for me, kind of what Jill said, kind of read the room of like friends and your family and see how they're reacting back. Because when I start to shut down, when I go down that road and it's just too much, anger creeps in and all of these qualities that I'm not proud of. And I lose my authentic self. And I start to see a change in me that I'm unhappy with. I don't want to live as like, I don't want to be this miserable person. But you have to be aware, because one day it's not like you're like, oh, I'm noticing I'm slipping down. No, you realize when you're at the bottom. And then you got to like build your way back up.
I just want to say that for physical therapy, we're out there, we're there to help, and don't wait till there's a crisis. We're there to help with equipment. We're there to help with integrating activities into your routine that fit well into your routine, and to give you suggestions on how your son can lead a healthy life. So don't wait until you really, really need us, or you're trying to get into that clinical trial. Make contact with a physical therapist early on and get suggestions about what you can do. It doesn't mean that you're coming once a week. Mm-hmm. Most children and men with physical therapy don't need therapy on a regular basis. It's usually just consultation on what you should be doing to lead that healthy life. So don't be afraid to reach out. There are physical therapists out there that know about Duchenne. So there are some key questions that you can ask to find out if they know about Duchenne. I met someone yesterday that had, I hope she doesn't mind me mentioning this, but who had a really good question for the therapist to figure out if they knew about Duchenne. And she would say, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact words, but she'd say, his calves are really strong, or something like that. And if the therapist didn't say anything, she'd go, oh boy, we're in the wrong spot. Because the large calves don't indicate strength. So she was like, oh, we might not be in the right place. So, just, we're there to help, but we're there to do healthy wellness consultation.
And I think also I'll just say on behalf of psychologists and mental health professionals, we are also there, and I agree that you don't need to be in crisis to say you need help. Sometimes having an ongoing relationship where you sort of are seeing somebody for a while and then maybe you're not, as your sort of relationship sort of changes over time with where you are in your life, I think that can be helpful, but it's really hard when you sort of wait until there's a crisis to kind of then start to unpack everything. I just want to this has been an awesome panel. I want to thank you all for sharing your perspectives around mental health. I think this was, you were all so forthcoming and so many words of wisdom, so thank you all for being here. And thank you all for being here too. I hope this was helpful, and we'll be around if anybody has any questions.